Do you feel like in America that we've become, because we were kind of a Christian nation, right?
Yeah.
Right? Wait, like people left England because they wanted to have religious freedom, right? And do you feel like we've kind of become more godless over time?
No, I just think we started worshiping false gods. I don't think that you can be godless. I don't think you can be godless the same way you can't be aimless. Like, look, if you're aimless, you know the old saying, the devil finds work for idle hands?
Oh, yeah.
If you're aimless, something will come for you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you'll be at a whim of whatever.
That's
if you
it.
don't have,
Okay,
if you're not blowing into your sails, then something else will.
That's for sure. So that's the crucial issue, is that, you know, people say, well, you don't have to orient yourself towards anything transcendent. Nothing transcendent exists. It's like, yeah, okay. Dispense with that. See what comes along to fill it. And people will say, well, the self does. It's now the self. It's like, no, it's not. It's the lowest possible whims of the self. Right? You think, well, I should be able to do what I want whenever I want. It's like, what I are you referring to exactly here? So you mean if you get angry, you should just be able to you should let that possess you and you should stomp around, eh? That's the war god, Mars. So that's your god now, or Venus, right? Lust, for example.
Yeah, then you'd be looking at pornography. Yeah, I think maybe we've got some really bad gods right now.
Yes, that's definitely the case.
Most people would probably agree with Theo Von here in saying that America has become godless. But Peterson disagrees that there's really such a thing as being godless. Instead, he argues that many have lost a transcendent orientation and pedestalized themselves to take the place of what once was divine. Now, he's definitely strawmanning atheism a little bit here, but I think his point stands. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to define a consistent moral system or a highest good completely within yourself or even within the world. Now, what he says next here piggybacks off this in regards to understanding biblical text and stories and how exactly they have served to define what that transcendent good or God is.
And what happens is if the unifying, the biblical corpus is a very strange collection of stories, because it tells a bunch of different pictures about God, and then it says, or it shows a bunch of different pictures of God, and then it says those are unified. There's something at the top. This is so cool. I'm writing a new book called We Who Wrestle with God, and it's an explanation of this. Oh gosh,
tag me into the ring, dude.
Hey man, it's coming along. It'll be out in March. So here's how the story works. It's so cool. It's so ridiculously cool. So it's a set of narrative propositions about the highest unifying spirit. Okay, so in the story of Noah, so this is a definition of God. This is the thing to understand. If you're a wise person and you're a good person, so that's Noah, there will be times when you have an intuition that tells you that you better prepare because bad times are coming. Okay? If you've been clear-headed and far-seeing, if you've conducted yourself properly, that's a spirit you should attend to. It might be that survival itself depends on it. That intuition, that's God. This is definition. That's what God is. Okay.
So that's what Noah said.
That's what the story of Noah means.
Yes.
Okay. But that doesn't...
Because he got the intuition that the flood was coming.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And the story insists that he was a wise man. So he's no fool who's running around thinking the sky is falling. Yeah. He's like a wise man looking forward and saying, look, trouble's coming. Yeah. Prepare.
He's locked in. Yeah.
Right. Okay, next story is the story of the Tower of Babel. Okay, so what happens in the Tower of Babel is that men decide to build these, they're called ziggurats, and a ziggurat is a building stretching to heaven. It's a seven-tiered representation of heaven, and the emperors in the area of that time, including the Babylonian Empire, would build these extremely high ziggurats, buildings, to show that they were the top god. But they weren't God, and so they're false idols, they're false pyramids, they're attempts to stretch up to heaven based on the wrong principle. And God in that story...
you can't use construction to get there.
Well, Stalin wasn't God. Right. And neither was Mao. And they built very large pyramids that were very unstable, and they collapsed and killed everyone. Right, and so God, in that story, is the spirit that punishes those who build false pyramids. Right, that there's something that should be at the top, and if you don't put the proper thing at the top, you'll build a false ideology, a false structure, and everything will come tumbling down. What's so cool in that story, this is so cool, when people strive improperly toward heaven, and they do that according to the wrong principles, they end up unable to communicate with each other. And that's what's happening in our culture. You see, we can't even agree on what a woman is. And I'm not making a joke about this.
Yeah, no, it's tough.
Yeah, so that means because we've been erecting false pyramids, we've fractured so badly we can't agree on what the basic elements of reality are. Yeah.
And does that usually correct itself, or what happens? Like, because we've never been in this time where we have this like reflective, like...
Two things always happen.
Okay.
Either God decides that he's had enough and everything goes, or everybody covers themselves in sackcloth and ashes and repents and reorients themselves, in which case things regenerate and they move on.
So we talked about a couple different things here, but he's really making the same case. He argues that ideologies such as Stalinism, ancient Egypt, or even modern day political ideologies will crumble because they're not oriented properly. He suggests that the question of how to orient large organizations of people and individuals is defined within the narratives of biblical stories containing virtues like spirits shown by characters such as Noah, which we can try to embody. He even says that we are becoming like the people of Babel who cannot communicate or agree on fundamental reality, which will inevitably lead to either our destruction or, if we make the effort, a revival. When taken with his other ideas about God and the nature of belief, it's clear that he has been making a case for this revival for some time. Peterson has said before in his debate with Sam Harris that he does not actually go to church, but that his biblical lectures fulfill that role by acting as a reiteration and clarifying of beliefs and virtues. Just now we saw him say that God is shown in many different pictures throughout the Bible, and when asked if he believes in God, he usually says,
I act as if God exists and that I'm terrified that he might.
To many critics of his, this seems to move the goalposts on what it means to believe and argue that what he believes is much different from most Christians. His perspective is definitely abnormal and actually a little postmodern at first. It kind of suggests that there exist other pretty good explanations, such as scientific explanations for reality, and that the existence of God may be unknown or undefined on the basis of reason alone. In acknowledging that the choice is undefined on reason alone, he chooses to orient himself towards a tested value system that functions generally well for people in the world. So his whole belief system first acknowledges that the truth itself is defined somewhat in service to value systems, such as holons, which we've talked about here before, and that humanity needs to be defined as a part of a greater whole, such as God, in order to function and continue without collapsing.
What do you think is going to happen?
Depends on how. See, what happens in the Exodus story, it's a real good example of this, is that the Pharaoh has put himself on a false pedestal. And the consequence of that is that worse and worse things start to happen to Egypt. That's the sequence of plagues. And each plague gets a little worse. Well, that's what happens, is that things will just get worse in waves of crisis until we admit to our error and reorient ourselves appropriately. And that can be, so what happens in the Exodus plagues is that, first of all, the whole world comes undone, and then the future is destroyed. That's the last plague. That's the death of the firstborn. Yeah, well, we're doing that already. Like, we're way below replacement in terms of birth rate.
Yeah.
The abortion stats, Gavin Newsom tweeted out the other day something about handguns being the prime killer of kids in the US. It's like, it's not even close to abortion.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably paid for one or two, to be honest, man, sadly. Or chipped in on them, I think. Do you think that nature hears that when we do abortions and stuff? Like, do you ever think, like, sometimes I think there's like this, like, what is nature thinking the whole time about our behaviors, Like, wonder what,
Well, the thing is that we're all punished for what we put at the top. Right? Because the structure that you use to orient yourself in your life is dependent on your values. And you might say, well, if you don't value human life, let's say, above all, well, then you don't value yourself above all. You value something else above that. You're going to pay for that in one way or another. Now, you might say, well, that's a price that I think is worth paying, or I don't think that human beings should be put on the top. That's your prerogative. But you will absolutely 100% pay in full for everything that you've done and for everything that you haven't done. I mean, how can it be otherwise.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what are you going to do? Reality isn't going to make itself manifest because of your whim. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, and you know, you can think about that religiously or not. There's no escaping from what is.
Right.
You know, and I'm going to write a chapter soon on the book of Job, and it's a very interesting book, because what happens in that book is that it's really a shocking book. What happens is that God has a bet with Satan, which is, you know, a little ethically questionable, let's say.
Yeah, this could be
So
good time
there's
for a
Job.
DraftKings ad too. I'm just joking, but that'd be funny.
Job's a good guy.
Uh-huh.
And Satan gets word of him, and he knows God's happy with him, and he goes to God and he says, you know, Job, you know that guy you think so great? I don't think he's so great. I think if you let me torture him, I can make him denounce you and lose faith. And God says, I don't think so. He's yours. And you know, people in their lives, you know, sometimes they'll enter a period where all hell is breaking loose and everything seems to be conspiring against them. So these things happen. And so Job, it's like, first of all, his whole family's destroyed, then everything he owns. So that's act one. Then Satan curses him with a terrible skin disease.
Yeah, that's tough.
Right,
That's
right.
tough,
And then he has to sit in the ashes, scraping himself. And then his friends come along and tell him that he must have done something wrong because otherwise the universe wouldn't be conspiring against him. So that's about as bad as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then God himself comes along and says, who are you to complain about your fate? Right. Now, if you don't think that's going to happen to you in your life, you're not very smart, because that is going to happen to you in your life. So then the question is, what the hell should you do about it? And one answer would be, well, that sucks. It's God and Satan against you. You know, you're kind of outmatched. It's completely unfair because you were good, and everything that you valued is taken away from you. So what should you do? You know, when you shake your fist at the sky and raise a middle finger and you know, like, now I'm on the side of Cain and the devils, and I'm going to be resentful and bitter. And people might look and think, well, it's no wonder you're resentful and bitter, like you lost your whole family, you have a terrible disease, your friends are laughing at you. Right, so you have every reason. That isn't what happens in the story. Job decides that no matter what happens to him, and he means that, no matter what happens to him, he's going to maintain his ethical orientation and aim up. And I think that's... But then you think, look, man, forget about the religious trappings. Here's hell. Hell is when you get cancer. And then you're bitter and resentful about it, and you make your last 6 months a living nightmare. Right, and so you might say, well, you've got cancer, and that sucks, and no doubt it sucks, and maybe it's unfair, and probably it is, and maybe even, you know, God and Satan themselves bet against you. You're going to aim up and maintain your dignity and your integrity, or are you going to take a bad situation and make it into every goddamn nightmare you can possibly imagine? Think, well, of course you have to aim up no matter what happens to you. And you think, well, that's not fair. It's like, well, it's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
And what does fair have to do with it? What's your choice? You're going to dig a deeper pit? Or are you going to have some integrity in the face of life's catastrophe? You know, and I think we know the answer to that, because when you meet people who have integrity in the face of catastrophe, you're struck with admiration for them.
Yeah.
Right. So that's your heart speaking, man. It's like, I don't know how you do it.
Here he kind of continues on what he was saying earlier, where it's reasonable to have resentment and to be bitter, especially in the case of Job, but only by accepting that life is unfair and still choosing to orient up will we not make things worse for ourselves and others. His view of life is not idealist at all. It's actually pretty grim. But his perspective on what action we should take is pretty clear, kind of in a way resembling the Stoic philosophy. Always orient toward the higher good and hold on to your dignity and your conviction in the face of adversity, because anything less will only make it worse. One other thing he said earlier was that whatever we orient towards, we will have to pay for. Some would disagree with this because it seems that we as individuals can sometimes get away with certain shortcuts around reality. But his perspective is more true, thinking in the wide view, even after our deaths, looking at the future of humanity. Then the consequences of our beliefs and actions can be felt, not in ourselves but in next generations. This seems to me to imply that Peterson takes a perspective of wholeness and shared responsibility that can only be embodied by seeing humanity as a part of a greater whole in which we play a valuable role. Now, you let me know what you thought about this brief examination of Peterson's ideas expressed here, and let me know if you want more videos like this. If you like this perspective and you appreciate the way I approach this, then please hit that subscribe button and comment down below. And as always, never stop questioning, talking, and thinking. Thank you.